Chapter 29 The Catacombs of Saint Sebastian. In his whole life, Franz had never experienced such a sudden change of impressions, such a swift transition from jollity to sadness as at that moment. It was as though Rome had been changed by the magic breath of some demon or darkness into a vast tomb. It so chanced, too, that the moon was on the wane and would not rise until about 11 o'clock, which added to the intensity of the darkness. The streets the young man traversed were, therefore, plunged into blackest obscurity. He had not far to go, however, and at the end of 10 minutes his carriage, or rather the Count's, stopped before the Hotel de Londres. Dinner was waiting, but as Albert had said he did not expect to be in so soon, Franz sat down to table without him. At 11 o'clock, Albert had not come home. Albert had not come back. Franz put on his coat and went out, telling his host that he was spending the evening at the Duke of Bracciano's. The Duke of Bracciano's house was at that time one of the most charming in Rome. His wife, who was one of the last descendants of the Colonnas, did the honors in the most perfect style, and the parties she gave attained European celebrity. Franz and Albert had brought letters of introduction to them, and the Duke's first question was as to what had become of Albert. Franz replied that he had left him when they were extinguishing the Moccoletti, and had lost sight of him in the Via Miasiello. "Do you know where he went?" asked the Duke. "Not exactly, but I believe there was some question of a rendezvous." "Good heavens!" cried the Duke. "It is a bad day, or rather night, to be out late. You know Rome better than he does, and should not have let him go." "I should just as easily have stopped number 3 of the Barbari that won the race today. Besides, what could happen to him? Who knows? It is a very dark night, and the Tiber is very close to Via Marcello." Franz felt a shudder run down his back when he observed that the Duke was an uneasy in his mind as he himself was. "I left word at the hotel that I had the honor of spending the evening with you, Duke," he said, "and that they were to inform me directly he returned. Wait a moment. I believe one of my servants is looking for you." The Duke was not mistaken. On observing Franz, the servant came up to him. "Excellency," said he, "the proprietor of the Hotel de Londres has sent to inform you that a man is waiting for you there with a letter from Viscount Morcerf." "A letter from the Viscount?" cried Franz. "Where is the messenger?" "He went away directly he saw me come into the ballroom to find you." Franz took his hat and hastened away. As he neared the hotel, he saw a man standing in the middle of the road, and did not doubt he was Albert's messenger. He went up to him and said, "Have you not brought me a letter from Viscount Morcerf?" "What is your Excellency's name?" "Baron Franz d'Épinay." "Then the letter is addressed to your Excellency." "Is there an answer?" asked Franz, taking the letter. "Your friend hopes so." Franz went in, and, as soon as his candle was lit, unfolded the paper. The letter was written in Albert's handwriting, and signed by him. Franz read it twice before he could comprehend the contents, which were as follows: "Dear Franz, directly you receive this, be good enough to take my letter of credit from my portfolio in the drawer of the writing desk, and add yours to it should it not be enough. Hasten to Torlonia's and draw out at once 4,000 piastres, which give to bearer. It is urgent that this sum of money should be sent to me without delay. I will say no more. for I count on you as you would count on me. Yours ever, Albert de Morcerf. P.S. I now believe in Italian bandits. Beneath these lines the following words were written in a strange hand. Se alle se della mattina le 4.000 mil pistre non sono se nel mi mani alle 7 e Conte Alberto avrà cessato di vivere. Oh man, my Italian, atrocious. If the 4,000 piastres are not in my hands by 6 in the morning, Count Albert will have ceased to exist at 7 o'clock. Luigi Vampa. This second signature explained all to Franz. Albert had fallen into the hands of the famous chief of banditti, in whose existence he had for so long refused to believe. There was no time to lose. He hastened to the desk, opened it, found the portfolio in the drawer, and in the portfolio the letter of credit. It was made out for 6,000 piastres, but Albert had already spent 3,000. Franz had no letter of credit, as he lived at Florence, and had come to Rome for but 7 or 8 days. He had only taken 100 louis with him, and of these he had not more than 50 left. 700 or 800 piastres were therefore lacking to make up the requisite sum. But in such circumstances Franz could always be sure that Messieurs Torlonia would oblige him. He was about to return to the Bracciano Palace without loss of time, when a bright idea occurred to him. He would appeal to the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count was in a small room which was surrounded by divans, which Franz had not yet seen. "Well, what good wind blows you here at this hour?" said he. "Have you come to ask me to supper? That would indeed be very kind of you." "No, I have come to speak to you of a very serious matter. Are we alone?" The Count went to the door and returned. "Quite alone," said he. Franz gave him Albert's letter. "Read that," said he. The Count read it. "What do you say to that?" asked Franz. "Have you the money he demands?" "Yes, all but 800 piastres." The Count went to his desk, opened a drawer filled with gold, and said, "I hope you will not offend me by applying to anyone but me. You see that, on the contrary, I have come straight to you. Thank you. Take what you please. It is absolutely necessary to send the money to Luigi Vampa." "Is it? Okay. Is it absolutely necessary to send the money to Luigi Vampa?" asked the young man, looking fixedly at the Count. "Judge for yourself. The postscript is explicit." "I have an idea that if you took the trouble to reflect, you would find an easier way out of it," said Franz. "How so?" returned the Count with surprise. "I am sure that if we went together to Luigi Vampa, he would not refuse you Albert's freedom. What influence can I possibly have over a bandit? Have you not just rendered him one of those services that are never forgotten?" "What is that?" "Have you not saved Peppino's life?" "Who told you that?" "No matter, I know it." The Count knit his brows and remained silent a moment. "And if I were to seek Vampa, would you accompany me? If my society would not be disagreeable." "Very well, then. It is a lovely night, and a drive in the outskirts of Rome will do us both good. Where is the man who brought this letter?" "In the street." "We must learn where we are going to. I will call him in." The Count went to the window and whistled in particular manner. The man left the cover of the wall and advanced into the center of the street. "Salite!" Ah, so come up in Italian. "Salite!" said the Count in the same tone in which he would have given an order to a servant. The messenger obeyed without the least hesitation, with alacrity rather, and coming up the steps at a bound, entered the hotel. 5 seconds later he was at the door. "Ah, it is you, Peppino," said the Count. Instead of answering, Peppino threw himself on his knees, and seizing the Count's hands, covered them with kisses. "You have not forgotten that I saved your life, then?" "No, Excellency, I shall never forget it," returned Peppino, in a tone of profound gratitude. "Never? That is a long time, but it is something that you believe so. Rise and answer me." Peppino glanced anxiously at Franz. "Oh, you may speak before His Excellency," said the Count. "He is one of my friends." "Permit me to give you this title," continued the Count in French. "It is necessary so as to give this man confidence." "Good," returned Peppino. "I am ready to answer any questions your Excellency may address to me. How did Viscount Albert fall into Luigi's hands?" "Excellency, the Frenchman's carriage several times passed the one in which Teresa was driving. The Frenchman threw her a bouquet. Teresa returned the compliment, of course, with the consent of the chief, who was in the carriage." "What?" cried Franz. "Was Luigi Vampa in the carriage with the Roman peasants?" "It was he who drove, disguised as a coachman. The Frenchman took off his mask, and Teresa, with the chief's consent, did the same. The Frenchman asked for a rendezvous. Teresa gave him one, but instead of Teresa, it was Beppo on the steps of the church of San Giacomo." "What?" exclaimed Franz. "The peasant girl who snatched his mocoletto from him?" "Was a lad of 15, replied Peppino. "But it was no shame on your friend to have been deceived. Beppo has taken in many more." "And Beppo led him outside the walls?" asked the Count. "Exactly so. A carriage was waiting at the end of Via Mossello. Beppo got in and invited the Frenchman to follow him, and he did not wait to be asked twice. Beppo told him he was going to take him to a villa a league from Rome. The Frenchman assured him he would follow him to the ends of the world. When they were about 200 yards outside the gates, the Frenchman became somewhat too familiar. So Beppo put a brace of pistols to his head. The coachman pulled up and did likewise. At the same time, 4 of the band, who were concealed on the banks of the Almo, dashed up to the carriage doors. The Frenchman tried to defend himself, and indeed nearly strangled Beppo. But he was powerless against 5 armed men, and was forced to give in. They made him get out and walk along the bank of the river, and thus brought him to Teresa and Luigi, who were waiting for him in the catacombs of Saint Sebastian. "Well, this seems quite a likely story," said the Count, turning to Franz. "What do you say to it?" "Why, that I should think it very funny if it had happened to anyone but Albert. He is in a very picturesque spot. Do you know the catacombs of Saint Sebastian?" "I have never been there, though I have often wanted to go." "Well, here is an opportunity ready to hand, and it would be difficult to find a better one." The Count rang, and a footman appeared. "Order out the carriage," he said, "and remove the pistols which are in the holsters. You need not awaken the coachman. Ali will drive." In a very short time the noise of wheels was heard, and the carriage stopped at the door. The Count took out his watch. 12:30, he said. "If we started at 5 o'clock, we should be in time, but the delay might cause your friend an uneasy night. So we had better go with all speed to rescue him from the hands of the brigands. Are you still resolved to accompany me?" "More determined than ever." "Well, then, come along." Franz and the Count went downstairs, accompanied by Peppino, and found the carriage at the door with Ali on the box. Franz and the Count got in. Peppino placed himself beside Ali, and they set off at a rapid pace. At the St. Sebastian gate, the porter raised objections, but the Count of Monte Cristo produced an authorization from the governor of Rome to leave or enter the city at any hour of the day or night. The portcullis was therefore raised, the porter had a louis for his trouble, and they went on their way. The road which the carriage now traversed was the ancient Appian Way, with its border of tombs. By the light of the moon, which was now rising, Franz imagined from time to time that he saw a sentry emerge from behind a ruin, and at a sign from Peppino disappear again. A short time before they reached the circus of Caracalla, the carriage stopped. Peppino opened the door, and the Count and Franz alighted. "We shall be there in about 10 minutes," said the Count to his companion. Taking Peppino aside, he gave him some instructions in a low voice, and Peppino went away, taking with him a torch they had brought with them in the well of the carriage. 5 minutes elapsed. during which time Franz saw a shepherd advance along a narrow path in between the irregularities of the ground and then disappear in the tall red grass that looked like the bristling mane of some gigantic lion. "Now, let us follow him," said the Count. They went along the same path, which, after about 100 yards, led them down a sharp incline to the bottom of a little valley. There they perceived two men talking together in a sheltered nook. One of these men was Peppino. The other was a man on sentry duty. Franz and the Count advanced, and the bandit saluted. "Excellency," said Peppino, addressing the Count, "have the goodness to follow me. The opening to the catacombs is but 2 yards from here." "Very well," said the Count. "Lead the way." And there, behind a clump of bushes, in the midst of several rocks, an opening presented itself, which was hardly large enough for a man to pass through. Peppino was the first to creep through the crack, but had not gone many steps before the subterranean passage suddenly widened. He stopped, lighted his torch, and looked round to ascertain whether the others were following him. Franz and the Count were still compelled to stoop, and there was only just sufficient width to allow them to walk two abreast. They had proceeded about 50 yards in this manner when the cry, "Who goes there?" brought them to a standstill. At the same time they saw the light of their torch reflected on the barrel of a carbine in the darkness beyond. "A friend," said Peppino, and advancing alone he said a few words in an undertone to the sentry, who, like the first, saluted and signed to the nocturnal visitors to continue their way. Behind the sentry there were some 20 steps. Franz and the Count went down them and found themselves in front of the crossroads of a burial place. 5 roads diverged, like the rays of a star, and the sides of the walls, hollowed out into niches in the shape of coffins, indicated that they had at last come to the catacombs. In one of these cavities, of which it was impossible to discover the size, some rays of light were visible. The Count placed his hand on Franz's shoulder and said, "Would you like to see a bandit camp at rest?" "I should indeed," was Franz's reply. "Come with me, then. Peppino, put out the torch." Peppino obeyed, and they were in complete darkness. They proceeded in silence, the Count guiding Franz as if he possessed the peculiar faculty of seeing in the dark. Little did he know. 3 arches confronted them, the center one forming a door. On one side these arches opened on to the corridor in which Franz and the Count were standing, and on the other into a large square room entirely surrounded by niches similar to those already mentioned. In the center of this room were 4 stones, which had formerly served as an altar, however spooky, as was evident from the cross which still surmounted them. A lamp, placed at the base of a pillar, lighted with a pale and flickering flame the singular scene which presented itself to the eyes of the 2 visitors concealed in the shadows. In the shadow, a man was seated reading, with his elbow on the column and his back to the arches through which the newcomers watched him. This was the chief of the band, Luigi Vampa. Around him, grouped according to fancy, could be seen some 20 brigands lying on their mantles or with their backs against one of the stone seats, which ran all around the columbarium. Each one had his carbine within reach. Down below, silent, scarcely visible, and like a shadow, was a sentry, who was walking up and down before a kind of opening. When the Count thought Franz had gazed long enough on this picturesque tableau, he raised his finger to his lips to warn him to be quiet, and, ascending the 3 steps which led from the corridor to the columbarium, entered the room by the center arch, and advanced toward Vampa, who was so intent on the book before him that he did not hear the sound of his footsteps. Who goes Who goes there? Cried the sentry, who was on the alert, and saw by the light of the lamp a growing shadow approaching his chief. At this cry, Vampa rose quickly, at the same time taking a pistol from his belt. In a moment 20 bandits were on their feet with their carbines leveled at the Count. "Well," said he in a perfectly calm voice and without moving a muscle, "well, my dear Vampa, it appears to me that you receive your friends with a great deal of ceremony." "Ground arms!" shouted the chief, with a commanding sweep of one hand, whilst with the other he respectfully took off his hat. Then, turning to the singular person who was watching this scene, he said, "Excuse me, Count, but I was far from expecting the honor of a visit from you, and did not recognize you." "It seems that your memory is equally short in everything, Vampa," said the Count, "and that not only do you forget people's faces, but also the conditions you make with them." "What conditions have I forgotten, Count?" inquired the bandit with the air of a man who, having committed an error, is anxious to repair it. "Was it not agreed," asked the Count, "that not only my person but that of my friends should be respected by you? And how have I broken faith, your Excellency?" "You have this evening carried off and conveyed hither the Viscount Albert de Morcerf. Well," continued the Count, in a tone which made Franz shudder, "this young gentleman is one of my friends. This young gentleman is staying in the same hotel as myself. This young gentleman has done the Corso for a week in my carriage, and yet, I repeat to you, you have carried him off and conveyed him hither. And," added the Count, taking a letter from his pocket, "you have set a ransom on him as if he were just anybody." "Why didn't some of you tell me all this?" inquired the brigand chief, turning toward his men, who all retreated before his look. "Why have you allowed me to fail thus in my word towards a gentleman like the Count, who has all our lives in his hands? By heavens, if I had thought that one of you knew that the gentleman was a friend of his Excellency's, I would blow his brains out with my own hand." "You see," said the Count, turning towards Franz, "I told you there was some mistake." "Are you not alone?" asked Vampa with uneasiness. "I am with the person to whom this letter was addressed, and to whom I desired to prove that Luigi Vampa was a man of his word. Come, your Excellency, here is Luigi Vampa, who will himself express to you his regret at the mistake he has made." Franz approached. The chief advanced several steps toward him. "Your Excellency is right welcome," he said to him. "You heard what the Count just said, and also my reply. Let me add that I would not have had such a thing happen, not even for the 4,000 piastres at which I had fixed your friend's ransom." "But where is the Viscount?" said Franz, looking round anxiously. "Nothing has happened to him, I hope?" asked the Count with a frown. "The prisoner is there," replied Vampa, pointing to the recess in front of which the bandit sentry was on guard, "and I will go myself and tell him he is free." The chief went toward the place he had pointed out as Albert's prison, and Franz and the Count followed. Vampa drew back a bolt and pushed open a door. By the gleam of a lamp, Albert was seen wrapped up in a cloak which one of the bandits had lent him, lying in a corner of the room in profound slumber. "Well, I never," said the Count, smiling in his own peculiar way. "That is not so bad for a man who is to be shot at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning." Vampa looked at Albert in admiration. "You are right, Count," he said. "This must be one of your friends." Then, going up to Albert, he touched him on the shoulder, saying, "Will your Excellency please to awaken?" Albert stretched out his arms, rubbed his eyes, and said, "Ah, is that you, Captain? Well, you might have let me sleep. I was having such a delightful dream. I was dancing the galop at the Duke's with the Countess G." Then he drew from his pocket his watch, which he had kept by him that he might see how the time sped. "1:30 only," said he. "Why the devil do you rouse me at this hour?" "To tell you that you are free, Excellency. A gentleman to whom I can refuse nothing has come to demand your liberty." "Come here?" "Yes, here." "Really? That's very kind of him." Albert looked round and perceived Franz. "What? Is it you, Franz, who have been so friendly?" "No, not I, but our friend the Count of Monte Cristo." "You, Count," said Albert gaily, the while arranging his neckband and cuffs. "You are really a most valuable friend, and I hope you will consider me as eternally obliged to you, in the first place for the carriage, and now for this service." And he put out his hand. The Count shuddered as he gave his own, but he gave it nevertheless. The bandit gazed on this scene with amazement. He was evidently accustomed to see his prisoners grovel before him, yet here was one whose gay spirits never faltered, even for one moment. As for Franz, he was delighted at the way in which Albert had maintained the honor of his country, even in the presence of death. "If you make haste, Albert," he said, "we shall still have time to finish the night at the Duke's. You can continue your interrupted gallop, so that you will owe no ill will to Signor Luigi, who has, indeed, acted like a gentleman throughout this whole affair." "Quite right. We may reach the palazzo by 2 o'clock, Signor Luigi," continued Albert. "Is there any formality to fulfill before I take leave of your Excellency?" "None, Signore," replied the bandit. "You are as free as the air." What a weird phrase. "None, Signore," replied the bandit. "You are as free as the air." "Well, then, a happy and merry life to you. Come, messieurs, come. Ah, excuse me, may I?" He lighted a cigar at a torch which one of the bandits was holding. "Now, Count," he continued, "let us make all possible speed. I am most anxious to finish my evening at the Duke of Bracciano's." They found the carriage where they had left it. The Count said a word to Ali, and the horses went off at a great speed. It was just 2 o'clock by Albert's watch when the two friends entered the ballroom. Their return made quite a stir, but as they entered together all uneasiness on Albert's account was instantly dispelled. "Madame, you were kind enough to promise me a gallop," said Viscount Morcerf, advancing toward the Countess. "I am rather late in claiming this gracious promise, but my friend here, whose truthful character you well know, will assure you the delay was through no fault of mine." At this moment the music struck up for a waltz, and Albert put his arm round the Countess's waist and disappeared with her in the whirl of dancers. Franz, in the meanwhile, was pondering over the peculiar shudder that shook the Count of Monte Cristo's whole frame when he had been in some sort compelled to give his hand to Albert. On rising the next morning, Albert's first thought was to pay a visit to the Count. He had thanked him in the evening, it is true, but it seemed to him it was not too much to thank a man twice for a service such as the Count had rendered him. The Count of Monte Cristo attracted Franz, yet filled him with terror, and he would not let Albert go alone. They were shown into the salon, where the Count joined them 5 minutes later. Albert advanced toward him, saying, "Permit me, Count, to say to you this morning what I expressed so badly yesterday evening. Never shall I forget the way in which you came to my assistance, nor the fact that I practically owe you my life." "My dear fellow," replied the Count, smiling, "you're exaggerating your obligations toward me. You are indebted to me for a small economy of some 20,000 francs in your traveling budget, and that is all. It is scarcely worth mentioning. On the other hand," he added, "permit me to congratulate you on your admirable coolness and indifference in the face of danger." "Oh, tut tut," said Albert. "I try to imagine I had had a quarrel resulting in a duel, and I wanted to show these bandits that though duels are fought in nearly every country of the world, it is only the French who fight with a smile on their lips. This, however, in no way lessens my obligations towards you, and I have come to ask you whether I, my friends, or my acquaintances cannot serve you in any way. My father, the Count of Morcerf, who is of Spanish origin, holds a high position both in France France and in Spain, and he and all who love me will be only too pleased to be of any service to you. I will own that I expected your offer, Monsieur de Morcerf, said the Count, and I accept it wholeheartedly. I had already decided to ask you a great favor. I have never yet been to Paris. I do not know it at all. I should probably have undertaken this indispensable journey long ago, had I known someone to introduce me into Paris society. Your offer has decided me. When I go to France, my dear Monsieur de Morcerf, the Count accompanied these words with a peculiar smile, will you undertake to introduce me to the society of the capital, where I shall be as complete a stranger as though I had come from Horon or Cochin China? It would give me great pleasure to do so, replied Albert. You can depend on me and mine to do all in our power for you. I accept your offer, said the Count, for I assure you I have only been waiting for just such an opportunity to realize a hope I have had in view for some time past. When do you propose going? When shall you be there yourself? Oh, I shall be there in a fortnight or 3 weeks at the latest. Very well, said the Count. I will give you 3 months, which would be allowing a wide margin. Then, examining a calendar that was hanging near the mirror, he continued, Today is the 21st of February. Will it suit you if I call on you on the 21st of May at 10:30 in the morning? Splendid, said Albert. Breakfast will be ready. Where do you live? Rue du Helder, number 27. Very well, said the Count. He took his notebook from his pocket and wrote, Rue du Helder, number 27, May the 21st at 10:30 a.m. And now, said he, replacing his notebook, you may rely on me. The hand of your timepiece will not be more accurate than I shall be. Shall I see you again before I leave? Albert asked. That depends upon when you leave. I leave at 5 o'clock tomorrow evening. In that case, I must bid you farewell. I have to go to Naples on business, and shall not be back until Saturday or Sunday. What about you, Baron? The Count asked Franz. Are you leaving Rome, too? Yes, I am going to Venice. I intend staying in Italy for another year or 2. We shall not see you in Paris then. I regret that I shall not have that pleasure. Well, then, I wish you a safe journey, messieurs, said the Count to the 2 friends, shaking hands with them both. It was the first time Franz had touched this man's hand, and he felt a shudder go through him, for his hand was as cold as a corpse. It is quite understood, then, said Albert, that on your honor you will visit me at 27 Rue du Helder at 10:30 on the morning of the 21st of May, is it not? At 10:30 on the morning of the 21st of May, repeated the Count. Upon this the two young men took their leave of the Count and went to their own quarters. What is the matter with you? Albert asked Franz. You have a somewhat worried look. I must own, said Franz, that the Count is a peculiar man, and I feel very uneasy about the appointment he has made with you in Paris. Uneasy about our appointment? Really, my dear Franz, you must be mad, exclaimed Albert. Whether I am mad or not, that's what I feel about it, said Franz. Oh my. That was a heckin' long chapter there. Let's see. So we're on to chapter 30, and because we're between chapters, let me see what time. I can definitely read at least one more chapter before we have to go on break. So, since we're between chapters, as a friendly reminder, hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever it is that you need to relax and enjoy the story. So the Count got his introduction to the son, the Viscount Morcerf. You got it, Carmelo. So he got his introduction to, don't forget to stretch, the Viscount Morcerf. Albert. Yeah, big stretch. Franz is just another young man from, another family, the Count, or, I'm not sure what, the Baron, I believe. So the Baron Franz is just another young man that knows Albert and was traveling with him abroad, but will be staying in Italy, while Albert returns to France, and the Count is on. The Count is following him too. Hi, Lucy. Welcome in. Depending on which mod is here, I think Monoma is still here. Churros Bosan. Hello. I see you over there. And Miv too. Lovely seeing you guys. Hi, Lucy. Lucy Cat, you guys. A super cute cat VTuber, variety streamer. I was very fortunate to meet them. I believe, was it through Mukia or was it for Luca? I'm not sure. I think it was Luca, maybe? Hey, Monoma, can I get a shout out for Lucy when you have a second? Anyway, so we're between chapters. I told you all to take care of yourselves. I'm so cruel and unusual, aren't I? It was a bit of a collab. Super cute. Wonderful. Let's see what my librarian assistant had to say. Welcome to the library, Lucy Cat VT. A delightful Baki Maneki Neko. Offers a variety of gaming experiences, as I said. From Peak to Persona Gacha, this chill catboy streamer enjoys playing with friends and engaging with chat. Their streams are a cozy haven for random gameplay and good company. Do stop by for a visit. I concur with this entire statement. Lucy is a good time. Very, very chill. Super cute. Okay. We return to the story, so tuck yourselves in and we'll continue on with the next chapter, which, let's see, I have a little, how much time do I have here? A little bit. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, so we'll definitely only be able to get through this chapter before we have to get into an ad break, which is fair. Okay. Chapter 30. The Guests. In the house in the Rue du Helder, to which Albert de Morcerf had invited the Count of Monte Cristo, great preparations were being made on the morning of the 21st of May to do honor to the guest. Albert de Morcerf's house was at the corner of a large courtyard. Opposite another building set apart for the servants' quarters. Only 2 of the windows faced the street. 3 others overlooked the courtyard, and 2 at the back overlooked the garden. Between the court and the garden was the spacious and fashionable residence of the Count and Countess of Morcerf, built in the unsightly imperial style. A high wall ran the whole length of the property facing the street, and was surmounted at intervals by vases, and divided in the middle by a large wrought iron gate with gilt scrollings, which served as a carriage entrance, while pedestrians passed in and out of the building through a small door next to the porter's lodge. In the choice of a house for Albert, it was easy to discern the delicate foresight of a mother, who, while not wishing to be separated from her son, realized that a young man of the Viscount's age needed entire liberty. On the other hand, the intelligent egotism of a young man enchanted with the free and easy life of an only son who had been thoroughly pampered could also be recognized. On the morning of the appointed day, the young man was sitting in a small salon on the ground floor. A valet entered. He had in one hand a bundle of newspapers, which he deposited on a table, and in the other a packet of letters, which he gave to his young master. Albert glanced carelessly at the different missives. selected 2 perfumed envelopes which were written in a small, neat handwriting, opened them, and perused their contents with a certain amount of attention. "How did these letters come?" he asked. "The one came by post, and the other one was brought by Madame Danglars' valet. Inform Madame Danglars that I accept the seat she offers me in her box. Wait a moment. Some time during the day tell Rosa that when I leave the opera I will sup with her as she asks. Take her 6 bottles of assorted wines, Cyprus, sherry, and Malaga, and a barrel of Ostend oysters. Get the oysters from Burrell's, and be sure to tell him they are from me." "What time do you wish breakfast, monsieur?" "What time is it now?" 9:45. "Very well, have it ready punctually by 1/2 past. By the way, is the Countess up yet?" "If the Viscount wishes, I will inquire." "Do. And ask her for one of her cellarettes. Ask her for one of her liquor cellarettes. Mine is incomplete. Tell her also that I shall have the honor of calling on her at about 3 o'clock, and that I ask permission to introduce someone to her." The valet left the room. Albert threw himself on the divan, opened 2 or 3 newspapers, looked at the theatre page, turned up his nose on perceiving that an opera and not a ballet was to be given, looked in vain amongst the advertisements for a tooth powder of which he had heard, and finally threw down one after the other the 3 leading papers of Paris, muttering between his yawns, "Really, these newspapers become more and more boring every day." Just then a carriage drew up at the door, and a moment later the valet announced Monsieur Lucien Debray, a tall, fair young man with a pale face, clear gray eyes, and thin, compressed lips, wearing a blue suit with chaste gold buttons, a white necktie, and tortoiseshell eyeglasses on a fine silk cord, entered the room with a semi-official air, without a smile, and without saying a word. "Good morning, Lucien." "Good morning," said Albert. "What punctuality! Did I say punctuality? Why, I expected you last, and you have arrived at 5 minutes to 10, whereas the time fixed was 10:30. It is really marvelous." "Monsieur Beauchamp, 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 Beauchamp." "Monsieur Beauchamp," announced the servant. Come in, you wielder of the terrible pen," said Albert, rising and advancing to meet the young man. "Here is Debray, who detests you and will not read your works. Anyhow, that is what he says." "Quite right, too, for I criticize his works without even knowing what he does," said Beauchamp. "Good morning, then." Turning to Albert, he asked, "What sort of people are you expecting for breakfast?" "Bye, Monama, have a good one." "A gentleman and a diplomat," was the reply. "That means waiting another 2 hours for the gentleman and about 3 hours for the diplomat." "Nonsense, Beauchamp," said Albert. We shall sit down to breakfast punctually at 10:30. In the meantime, follow Debray's good example and taste my sherry and biscuits." Liquor and cookies for a pre-breakfast snack. That's a life. "Well, then, I will stay. I must do something to distract my thoughts this morning. Monsieur de Chateau Renaud, Monsieur Maximilien Morel," said the valet, announcing 2 fresh guests. "Now we are all here, and can go in to breakfast," said Beauchamp. "If I remember rightly, you only expected 2 more guests." "Morel," Albert murmured, surprised. "Morel, who is that?" But before he had finished speaking, Monsieur de Chateau Renaud, a handsome young man of 30, and a gentleman to his fingertips, took Albert by the arm, saying, "Allow me to introduce to you Monsieur Maximilien Morel, captain of Spahis, French cavalry unit, originally composed of Algerian natives. Interesting. Captain of Spahis. My friend And what is more, my saviour, salute my hero Viscount." So saying, he stepped to one side, and disclosed to the view of all present the tall and noble-looking young man with the wide brow, penetrating eyes, and black moustache, whom our readers will remember having seen at Marseilles. Hello, welcome in, Karek. Whom our readers will remember having seen at Marseilles in circumstances sufficiently dramatic to prevent his being forgotten. A handsome uniform, partly French and partly old book. A handsome uniform, partly French and partly Oriental, set off to perfection his broad chest, decorated with the cross of the Legion of Honor, and showed up his graceful and stalwart figure. The young officer bowed with easy politeness. Being strong, he was graceful in every movement. The Baron of Chateau Renaud knew what pleasure it would give me, monsieur, to make your acquaintance, said Albert courteously. You are his friend. Be mine too. Well said, remarked Chateau Renaud, and I hope that, given the occasion, he will do as much for you, Viscount, as he has done for me. What has he done for you? Oh, nothing worth mentioning, said Morel. My friend is exaggerating. What? Not worth mentioning, said Chateau Renaud. Is life, then, not worth mentioning? Upon my word, that is rather too philosophical. My dear Morel, it is evident from all this that Captain Morel saved your life. Tell us about it. Tell us all about it, said Beauchamp. Beauchamp, old fellow, you know I am dying of hunger, said Debray. Don't begin any of your stories now. Well, that won't prevent us from sitting down to table, replied Beauchamp. Chateau Renaud can tell us the story while we are at breakfast. Messieurs, said Albert, it is not yet 10:15, and you know I am expecting another guest. Well, then, as we cannot yet go in to breakfast, said Debray, pour yourself out a glass of sherry, as we have done, and tell us what took place. You all know that I had fancy for a trip to Africa, began Chateau Renaud. Being unwilling to let such talents as mine lie dormant, I decided upon the Arabs some new pistols that had been given me. I therefore embarked for Oran, whence I reached Constantine. Arriving in time to witness the raising of the siege, I retreated with the others, and withstood the rain during the day, and the snow at night, fairly well for 48 hours. On the morning of the third day, my horse died of the cold. Poor beast! My horse now being dead, I was compelled to make my retreat on foot. 6 Arabs rushed upon me at a gallop to cut off my head. I dropped 2 of them with 2 shots of my gun, and 2 more with my pistol. But there were still 2 more, and I was disarmed. One of the Arabs caught hold of me by the hair. That is why I now wear it short, for one never knows what may happen. The other one put his yatagan, which is a Turkish sword with an S-shaped blade. Interesting. The other one put his yatagan to my throat, and I already felt the cold point of the steel when this gentleman, whom you see here, charged down upon them, killed with a shot of his pistol the one who held me by the hair, and with his sword severed the head of the other who was making ready to cut my throat. He had set himself the task of saving a man on that particular day, and chance chose me to be that man. When I am rich, I shall have a statue of Chance made by Clagman or Marochetti. It was the 5th of September, said Morel, smiling, the anniversary of the day on which my father was miraculously saved. Every year I celebrate the day as far as possible by some action. The story of Monsieur Morel is alluding to is a most interesting one, continues Chateau Renaud, and he will tell it you when he knows you better. Today, let us fill our stomachs and not our memories. What time are you having breakfast, Albert? At 10:30. To the minute? Asked Debray, taking out his watch. You must give me 5 minutes' grace, said Morcerf, for I am expecting a saviour, too. Whose saviour? Mine. To be sure, replied Morcerf. Do you think I cannot be saved, too, and that it is only Arabs who cut off heads? Our breakfast is a philanthropic one. No, the Piazza del Popolo has not made a reappearance today. They are no longer in Italy. Our breakfast is a philanthropic one, and we shall have at table two benefactors. And we shall have at table two benefactors of humanity. At least I hope so. Do you think he is likely to be punctual? Asked Debray. Everything is possible with him. Well, with the 5 minutes grace. Before you dihydrate. Okay, you got it. The Count of Monte Cristo rescued Albert from the bandits, and now Albert, 3 months hence from that date, Albert is expecting the Count of Monte Cristo at breakfast, and that's where we are right now. Do you think he is likely to be punctual? Asked Debray. Everything is possible with him. Well, with the 5 minutes grace, we have only 10 left. I will profit by them to tell you something about my guest. I was at Rome last Carnival. We know that, said Beauchamp. Yes, but what you don't know is that I was carried off by bandits. There are no bandits, exclaimed Debray. Indeed there are, and ugly fellows too, or rather I should say fine ones, for I found them frightfully handsome. To continue, the brigands carried me off to a very gloomy spot called the Catacombs of St. Sebastian. I was told I was their prisoner, subject to a ransom, a mere trifle of 4,000 Roman crowns. Unfortunately, I had no more than 1,500. I was at the end of my journey, and my credit was exhausted, so I wrote to Franz. Oh yes, Franz was there too, and you can ask him whether I am telling you the absolute truth or not. Well, I wrote to Franz that if he did not come with the 4,000 crowns by 6 o'clock, I should have gone to join the blessed saints and glorious martyrs by 10 minutes past. And I can assure you that Monsieur Luigi Vampa, that is the name of the chief of the bandits, would have kept most scrupulously to his word. But Franz did arrive with the 4,000 crowns, said Chateau Renaud. A man bearing the name of Franz d'Épinay or Albert de Morcerf is certainly not at a loss for a sum of that amount. Fix that. There we go. No, he simply came accompanied by the guest whom I hope to introduce to you in a few minutes. He said 2 words in the chief's ear, and I was free. I suppose they even apologized for having kidnapped you, said Beauchamp. Just so, was the reply. Why, this man is a second Ariosto. No, he is nothing more nor less than the Count of Monte Cristo. There is no Count of Monte Cristo, said Debray. I do not think there is, added Chateau Renaud, with the air of a man who has got the whole of European nobility at his fingertips. Does anyone know of a Count of Monte Cristo anywhere? Perhaps he comes from the Holy Land, said Beauchamp. One of his ancestors most likely owned cavalry, just as the Mortemart owned the Dead Sea. Pardon me, messieurs, but I think I can help you out of the dilemma, said Maximilian. Monte Cristo is a small island I have often heard mentioned by my father's old sailors. It is a grain of sand in the middle of the Mediterranean, and an atom in the infinite. You are quite right, said Albert. And the man I speak of is lord and master of this grain of sand, this atom. He has doubtless purchased his title of count somewhere in Tuscany. "There is no Count of Monte Cristo," exclaimed Debray. "There is 10:30 striking. Confess that you have had a nightmare, and let's go in to breakfast." The sound of the clock had hardly died away, however, when the door opened and the valet announced, "His Excellency, the Count of Monte Cristo." All those present started involuntarily, thus showing the impression Albert's recital had made on them. Albert himself was seized with a sudden emotion. They had not heard the carriage in the street, nor any steps in the antechamber. Even the door had been opened noiselessly. The Count appeared on the threshold, dressed with the utmost simplicity. Yet the most exacting dandy could not have found fault with his attire. He advanced, smiling, into the center of the room, and went straight up to Albert, who shook his hand warmly. "Punctuality is the politeness of kings," said Monte Cristo. "At any rate, according to one of our sovereigns, but in spite of their goodwill." "Oh, hey, Sino, welcome in." "Oh, so far, so good. Thank you for stopping by." "Oh, and Oscurius is here. Hello, welcome in." "At any rate, according to one of our sovereigns, but in spite of their goodwill, travelers cannot always achieve it. I trust, however, that you will accept my goodwill, Count, and pardon me the 2 or 3 seconds by which I have failed in keeping our appointment. 500 leagues are not made without some trouble, especially in France, where it is apparently forbidden to beat the postilions." Postilions? I'm not sure. "Especially in France, where it is apparently forbidden to beat the postilions." "I was just announcing your visit to some of my friends, whom I have invited to do honor to the promise you were good enough to make me, and whom I now have the pleasure of introducing to you. They are the Count of Chateau Renaud, who traces his nobility back to the 12 peers, and whose ancestors had a seat at the Round Table. Monsieur Lucien Debray, private secretary to the Minister of the Interior. Monsieur Beauchamp, a formidable journalist and the terror of the French government. And Monsieur Maximilien Morel, captain of Spahis." On hearing this latter name, the Count, who had till now bowed courteously, but almost with the proverbial coldness and formality of the English, involuntarily took a step forward, and a slight tinge of red spread over his pale cheek. "You wear the uniform of the new conquerors, monsieur," he said. "It is a handsome uniform." One could not have said what caused the Count's voice to vibrate so deeply, or why his eye, usually so calm and limpid, now shone as though against his will. "Have you never seen our Africans, Count?" Albert asked. "Never," replied the Count, who had gained complete possession over himself once more. "Beneath this uniform beats one of the bravest and noblest hearts of the army." "Oh, Monsieur de Morcerf," interrupted Morel, "let me speak, Captain. We have just heard tell of such an heroic. We have just heard tell of such an mouth. Blah, 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 blah. Let me speak, Captain." Well, thank you for the follow.
Cat Lofi just followed.
Cat Lofi, welcome in. "Let me speak, Captain. We have just heard tell of such an heroic action on his part," continued Albert, "that though I see him today for the first time, I ask his permission to introduce him to you as my friend." At these words there was again discernible in Monte Cristo that strange, fixed stare, that furtive flush, and that slight trembling of the eyelids which to him denoted emotion. "You have a noble heart," said he. "Messieurs," said Albert, "breakfast is ready. Count, permit me to show you the way." They passed into the dining room in silence. The Count was, it soon became apparent, a most moderate eater and drinker. Albert remarked this and expressed his fear that at the outset Parisian life might be distasteful to the traveler in the most material, but at the same time the most essential point. If you knew me better, said the Count, smiling, you would not worry about such an almost humiliating matter in regard to a traveler like myself, who has lived successfully on macaroni at Naples, polenta at Madrid, olla podrida at Valencia, pilau at Constantinople, carec in India, and swallows' nests in China. Cooking does not enter into the calculations of a cosmopolitan like myself. I eat whatever is set before me, only I eat very little. Today, however, when you reproach me with moderation, I have a good appetite, for I have not eaten since yesterday morning. Not since yesterday morning, the guests exclaimed. You've not eaten for 24 hours? No, I was compelled to deviate from my route to get some information at Nimes. At Nimes? At Nimes, which made me a little late, so I would not wait for anything. So you ate in your carriage, said Morcerf. No, I slept as I always do when I am bored and have not the courage to amuse myself, or when I am hungry and have not the desire to eat. Can you then command sleep at will? Asked Morrel. More or less. I have an infallible recipe. That would be an excellent thing for us Africans, who have not always enough to eat and rarely enough to drink, said Morrel. That may be, said Monte Cristo. Unfortunately, however, unfortunately, I'm struggling, I'm just speaking too fast. Unfortunately, however, my recipe, which is excellent for a man like myself who leads an exceptional life, would be very dangerous when administered to an army, which might not wake when it was needed. But do you always carry this drug about with you? Asked Beauchamp, who, being a journalist, was very incredulous. Always, replied Monte Cristo. Would you mind if I asked to see one of these precious pills? Continued Beauchamp, hoping to take him at a disadvantage. Not at all, replied the Count, and he took from his pocket a wonderful bonbonniere. A bonbonniere, scooped out of a single emerald and closed by means of a gold screw, which being turned gave passage to a small round object of a greenish color and about the size of a pea. The bill had an acrid and penetrating odor. There were 4 or 5 of them in the emerald, which was large enough to contain a dozen. The bonbonniere passed from one guest to another, but it was to examine the wonderful emerald rather than to see the pills. It is a magnificent emerald, and the largest I have ever seen, though my mother has some remarkable family jewels, said Chateau Renaud. I had 3 like that one, returned Monte Cristo. I gave one of them to the Grand Seigneur, who has had it mounted on his sword, and the second to His Holiness the Pope, who has had it set in his tiara opposite one that is very similar, but not quite so magnificent, which was given to his predecessor, Pius VII, by the Emperor Napoleon. I have kept the 3rd one for myself, and have had it hollowed out. This has certainly reduced its value by 1/2, but has made it more adapted to the use I wished to make of it. Everyone looked at Monte Cristo in astonishment. He spoke so simply that it was evident he either was telling the truth or was mad. What did the 2 sovereigns give you in exchange for your magnificent gift? Asked Debray. The Grand Seigneur gave me a woman's freedom, His Holiness the life of a man. Was it not Peppino you saved? Exclaimed Morcerf. Was it not in his favor that you made use of your right to a pardon? Perhaps, said Monte Cristo, smiling. You have no idea, Count, what pleasure it gives me to hear you talk thus, said Morcerf. I had spoken of you to my friends as a fabulous man, a magician out of the Arabian Nights, a sorcerer of the Middle Asians. But Parisians are so subtle in paradoxes that they think the most incontestable truths are but flights of the imagination, when some truths do not enter into their daily routine. For instance, they contest the existence of the bandits of the Roman Campagna or the Pontine marshes. Pray tell them yourself, Count, that I was kidnapped by these bandits, and that in all probability, without your generous intervention, I should today be awaiting the eternal resurrection in the catacombs of Saint Sebastian, instead of inviting them to breakfast in my humble little house in the Rue du Helder. Tut, tut! You promised me never to speak of that trifle, said Monte Cristo. If I relate all that I know, said Morcerf, will you promise to tell what I do not know? That is only fair. That is only fair, replied Monte Cristo. Well, then, I will relate my story, though my pride must inevitably suffer thereby, began Albert. For 3 days I thought I was the object of the attentions of a masked lady, whom I took to be the descendant of Tullia or Poppaea, whereas I was but being lured on by the coquetry of a contadina. You will note I say contadina to avoid using the word peasant. All I know is that, fool that I was, I mistook for this contadina a young bandit of 15 or 16 with a beardless chin and slim figure. Just as I was taking the liberty of imprinting a kiss on his chaste shoulder, he put his pistol to my throat, and with the aid of 7 or 8 of his companions, led or rather dragged me to the depths of the catacombs of Saint Sebastian. Here I was informed that if by 6 o'clock the next morning I had not produced a ransom of 4,000 crowns, I should have ceased to exist by 6:15. The letter is still to be seen and is in Franz's possession, signed by me and with a postscript by Luigi Vampa. If you doubt my word, I will write to Franz, who will have the signature legalized. That is all I know. What I do not know, Count, is how you contrive to instill such great respect into the Roman bandits, who have respect for so little. I will own that both Franz and I were lost in admiration. I have known the famous Vampa for more than 10 years, said the Count. When he was quite young and still a shepherd, I once gave him a gold coin for showing me my way. To be under no obligation to me, he gave me a poniard carved by himself, which you must have seen in my collection of arms. Later on, whether it was that he had forgotten this little exchange of presents which should have sealed our friendship, or whether it was that he did not recognize me, I know not. But he tried to kidnap me. I, however, captured him together with 12 of his men. I could have delivered him up to Roman justice, which is somewhat expeditious, but I did not do so. I set him and his men free, on condition that he should sin no more, said the journalist, laughing. It delights me to see that they have kept their word so conscientiously. No, Monsieur Beauchamp, on the simple condition that they should always respect me and mine. And, continued the Count, I will appeal to these gentlemen. How could I have left my host in the hands of these terrible bandits, as you are pleased to call them? Please. Besides, you know I had a motive in saving you. I thought you might be useful in introducing me into Parisian society when I visited France. No doubt you thought this but a No doubt you thought this but a vague plan on my part, but today you see you are faced with the stern reality and must submit to it under pain of breaking your word. Oh dear no, said Monte Cristo. I do not carry Orientalism so far as that. Everybody around me is at liberty to leave me, and on leaving me will have no further need of me or anyone else. It may be that is the reason why they do not leave me. They had long since passed to dessert and cigars. "My dear Albert, it is 12:30, said Debray, rising. "Your guest is charming, but you know the best of friends must part. I must return to my office. Are you coming, Morel?" "As soon as I have handed the Count my card. He has promised to pay us a visit at 14 Rue Meslay." "Rest assured that I shall not forget," said the Count with a bow. Maximilian Morel left with the Baron of Chateau Renaud, leaving Monte Cristo alone with Morcerf. Chapter 31. The Presentation. When Albert was alone with Monte Cristo, he said, "Permit me to commence my office of cicerone by showing you my bachelor quarters. Accustomed as you are to the palaces of Italy, it will be interesting for you to note in what a small space a young man of Paris can live, and not feel that he is too badly off in regard to accommodation." Albert conducted the Count to his study, which was his favorite room. Monte Cristo was a worthy appreciator of all things Albert had collected here. Old cabinets, Japanese porcelain, Oriental stuffs, Venetian glass, weapons of all countries of the world, everything was familiar to him, and he recognized at a glance their date and country of origin. Morcerf had expected to be the guide, whereas it was he who, under the Count's guidance, followed a course of archaeology, mineralogy, and natural history. He led his guest into the salon, which was filled with works of modern artists. There were landscapes by Dupré, Arabian horsemen by Delacroix, watercolors by Boulanger, paintings by Diaz, drawings by Decamps. In a word, all the modern art can give in exchange and recompense for the art lost and gone with ages long since past. Albert expected to have something new to show the traveler this time at least, but to his surprise, without looking for the signatures, many of which were only initials, the Count at once named the author of every picture in such a manner that it was easy to see that each man was not only known to him, but that each style had been appreciated and studied. From the salon they passed into the bedchamber. It was a model of good taste and a simple elegance. One portrait only, signed Leopold Robert, loomed forth from an unpolished gilt frame. It was this portrait that first of all attracted the Count's attention, for he took 3 rapid steps across the room and suddenly stopped in front of it. It was the portrait of a young woman of about 5 or 26, with a dark complexion, eyes which glowed beneath languishing eyelids. She wore the picturesque costume of a Catalan fisherwoman, a red and black bodice, and had golden pins stuck in her hair. She was looking at the sea, and her beautiful profile was outlined against the twofold azure of sky and ocean. "This is a beautiful woman you have here, Viscount," said Monte Cristo in a perfectly calm voice, "and her dress, doubtless a ball dress, suits her charmingly." "That," said Albert, "is my mother's portrait. She had it painted 6 or 8 years ago during the Count's absence. Doubtless she thought to give him a pleasant surprise upon his return, but, strange to say, he did not like the portrait, and could never get over his antipathy to it. Between ourselves, I must tell you that the Monsieur de Morcerf is one of the most hard-working peers at the Luxembourg, and as a general is renowned for theory, but it is an indifferent connoisseur of works of art. It is not so with my mother, who paints remarkably well, and who, esteeming such a work too good to part with altogether, gave it to me, to hang up in my room where it would be less exposed to Monsieur de Morcerf's displeasure. Forgive my talking so much on family matters, but as I shall have the honor of introducing you to the Count, I tell you this lest you should praise this portrait before him. The portrait seems to have a malign influence. for my mother rarely comes to the room without looking at it, and still more rarely does she look at it without weeping. The appearance of this portrait in the house is, however, the only contention between my mother and father, who are still as united today after more than 20 years of married life as they were on their wedding day. And now that you have seen all my treasures, will you accompany me to Monsieur de Morcerf, to whom I wrote from Rome, giving an account of the service you rendered me and announcing your visit? I may say that both the Count and the Countess are anxious to tender you their thanks. Look upon this visit as an initiation into Paris life, a life of formalities, visits, and introductions. Monte Cristo bowed without replying. He accepted the proposal without enthusiasm and without regret as one of those society conventions which every gentleman looks upon as a duty. Albert called his valet and ordered him to announce to Monsieur and Madame de Morcerf the arrival of the Count of Monte Cristo. On entering the salon, they found themselves face to face with Monsieur de Morcerf himself. He was a man of 40 to 45 years of age, but he appeared at least 50. And his black mustache and eyebrows contrasted strangely with his almost white hair, which was cut short in the military fashion. He was dressed in civilian clothes, and wore in his buttonhole the ribbons indicating the different orders to which he belonged. "Father," said the young man, "I have the honor to introduce you to the Count of Monte Cristo, the generous friend I have the good fortune to meet in the difficult circumstances with which you are acquainted." "You are welcome amongst us," said the Count of Morcerf with a smile. "In preserving the life of our only heir, you have rendered our house a service which solicits our eternal gratitude." So saying, the Count of Morcerf gave Monte Cristo an armchair, while he seated himself opposite the window. And taking the chair indicated to him, Monte Cristo arranged himself in such a manner as to be hidden in the shadow of the large velvet curtains, whence he could read on the careworn features of the Count a whole history of secret griefs, and each one of the wrinkles time had imprinted there. "The Countess was at her toilet when your visit was announced," said Morcerf. She will be here. She will join us here in 10 minutes or so." "It is a great honor for me," said Monte Cristo, "that on the very day of my arrival at Paris, I should be brought into contact with a man whose merits equal his reputation, and on whom Dame Fortune, acting with equity for once, has never ceased to smile. But has she not on the Mitidja, I guess, but has she not on the Mitidja plains or the Atlas Mountains? That is the colonization of Algeria and Morocco. Well, okay. Or the Atlas Mountains, still the baton of a marshal to offer you." "I have left the service, monsieur," said Morcerf, turning somewhat red. "Created a peer at the Restoration, I served during the first campaign under Marechal de Beaumont. I was therefore entitled to a higher rank, and who knows what would have happened had the elder branch remained on the throne. But the July Revolution was apparently glorious enough to permit of ingratitude, and it was, indeed, inappreciative of my service that did not date from the imperial period. I, therefore, tendered my resignation. I have hung up my sword and flung myself into politics. I devote myself to industry and study the useful arts. I was anxious to do so during the 20 years I was in the army, but had not the time." "Such are the ideas that render your nation superior to all others," replied Monte Cristo. "A gentleman of high birth, in possession of a large fortune, you were content to gain your promotion as an obscure soldier. Then, after becoming a general, a peer of France, a commander of the Legion of Honor, you are willing to go through another apprenticeship with no other prospects, no other reward than that one day you will serve your fellow creatures. Really, Count, this is most praiseworthy. It is even more than that, it is sublime." If I were not afraid of wearying you, Count," continued the general, obviously charmed with Monte Cristo's manners, "I would have taken you to the chamber with me. Today's debate will be very interesting to such as do not know our modern senators." "I should be most grateful to you, Count, if you would renew this invitation another time. I have been flattered with the hope of an introduction to the Countess today, and I will wait for her." "Ah, here is my mother!" exclaimed Albert. And in truth, as Monte Cristo turned round, he saw Madame de Morcerf, pale and motionless, on the threshold of the door. As Monte Cristo turned toward her, she let fall her arm, which, for some reason, she had been resting against the gilt door-post. She had been standing there for some seconds, and had overheard the last words of the conversation. Monte Cristo rose and bowed low to the Countess, who curtsied ceremoniously without saying a word. "Whatever ails you, madame?" said the Count. "Perhaps the heat of the room is too much for you." "Are you ill, mother?" exclaimed the Viscount, rushing toward Mercédès. She thanked them both with a smile. "No," said she, "it has upset me a little to see for the first time him without whose interventions we should now be in tears and mourning. Monsieur, it is to you that I owe my son's life," she continued, advancing with queenly majesty, "and I bless you for this kindness. I am also grateful to you for giving me the opportunity of thanking you as I have blessed you. That is from the bottom of my heart. Madame, the Count and yourself reward me too generously for a very simple action. To save a man and thereby to spare a father's agony and a mother's feelings is not to do a noble deed, it is but an act of humanity." These words were uttered with the most exquisite softness and politeness. "It is very fortunate for my son, Count, that he has found such a friend," replied Madame de Morcerf, "and I thank God that it is so." And Mercédès raised her beautiful eyes to heaven with an expression of such infinite gratitude that the Count fancied he saw tears trembling in them. Monsieur de Morcerf went up to her. "Madame, I have already made my excuses to the Count," said he. "The session opened at 2 o'clock. It is now 3, and I have to speak." "Go along, then. I will try to make up to the Count for your absence," said the Countess, in the same tone of deep feeling. "Will you do us the honor, Count, of spending the rest of the day with us?" she continued, turning to Monte Cristo. "Believe me, Countess, no one could appreciate your kind offer more than I do. But I stepped out of my traveling carriage at your door this morning, and know not yet where or how my residence is provided for. I know it is but a slight cause for uneasiness, yet it is quite appreciable." "Then we shall have the pleasure another time. Promise us that, at least." Monte Cristo bowed without replying, but his gesture might well have been taken for assent. "Then I will not detain you longer," said the Countess. "I would not have my gratitude become indiscreet or importunate. Importunate. Then we shall have this pleasure another time. Promise us that, at least." Monte Cristo bowed without replying, but his gesture might well have been taken for assent. "Then I will not detain you longer," said the Countess. I would not have my gratitude become indiscreet or importunate." Monte Cristo bowed once more and took his leave. A carriage was waiting for him at the door. The illustrious traveller sprang into it. The door was closed behind him, and the horses went off at a gallop. Yet not so quickly that the Count did not notice an almost imperceptible movement which fluttered the curtain in the salon where he had just left Madame de Morcerf. When Albert returned to his mother, he found her reclining in a deep velvet armchair in her boudoir. What is this name, Monte Cristo?" asked the Countess when the servant had gone out. "Is it a family name, the name of an estate, or simply a title?" "I think it is nothing more than a title. The Count has bought an island in the Tuscan archipelago. Otherwise he lays no claim to nobility and calls himself a Count of Chance, though the general opinion in Rome is that he is a very great lord." "He has excellent manners." said the Countess, "at least so far as I could judge during the few moments he was here." The Countess was pensive for a moment. Then, after a short pause, she said, "I'm addressing a question to you, Albert, as your mother. You have seen Monsieur de Monte Cristo at home. You are perspicacious. You are perspicacious, know the ways of the world, and are more tactful than most men of your age. Do you think the Count is really what he appears to be?" "And what is that?" You said it yourself a minute ago, a great lord. I told you, mother, that he was considered as such." "But what do you think of him yourself, Albert?" "I must own I do not quite know what to make of him. I believe he is a Maltese." "I am not questioning you about his origin, but about himself." "Ah, that is a totally different matter. I have seen so many strange traits in him that if you wish me to say what I think, I must say that I consider him as a man whom misfortune has branded." "I have seen so many strange traits in him that if you wish me to say what I think, I must say that I consider him as a man whom misfortune has branded, a derelict, as it were, of some old family who, disinherited of his patrimony, has found one by dint of his own venturesome genius, which places him above the rules of society. Monte Cristo is an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, without inhabitants or garrison, the resort of smugglers of every nationality and of pirates from every country. Who knows whether these worthy industrialists do not pay their lord for his protection?" "Possibly," said the Countess, deep in thought. "What does it matter," replied the young man, "whether he be a smuggler or not? Now that you have seen him, mother, you must agree that the Count of Monte Cristo is a remarkable man who will create quite a sensation in Paris." "Has this man any friendship for you, Albert?" she asked, with a nervous shudder. "I believe so, mother. And you? Are you fond of him?" "I like him in spite of Franz d'Épinay, who always tries to convince me that he is a being returned from the other world." There was a strange terror in the Countess's voice as she said, "Albert, I have always put you on your guard against new acquaintances. Now you are a man and capable of giving me advice. Nevertheless, I repeat to you, be prudent, Albert." "Yet, if this advice is to be profitable, mother, I must know in advance what I am to guard against." "The Count does not gamble. He drinks nothing but water colored with a little Spanish wine. He is said to be so rich that without making himself a laughing-stock, he could not borrow money from me. What, then, have I to fear from him?" "You are right," said the Countess. "My fears are stupid, especially when directed against a man who has saved your life. By the way, did your father receive him nicely, Albert? It is important that we should not receive him like a mere stranger. Your father is sometimes preoccupied. His business worries him, and it may be that unintentionally—" "My father was perfect, mother," Albert broke in. "What is more, he seemed greatly flattered by 2 or 3 clever and appropriate compliments the Count paid him, with such ease that he might have known him for 30 years. They parted the best of friends." The Countess did not answer. She was so deeply absorbed in her own thoughts that her eyes gradually closed. The young man stood before her, looking down on her with filial affection, which is more tender and loving in children whose mother is still young and beautiful. Then, seeing her close her eyes, he listened for a moment to her peaceful breathing and tiptoed out of the room. Chapter 32. Unlimited Credit. The next day, toward 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a carriage drawn by 2 magnificent English horses drew up before Monte Cristo's door. In it sat a man dressed in a blue coat, with silk buttons of the same color, a white waistcoat over which passed a heavy gold chain, and brown trousers. His hair was jet black, and descended so far over his forehead that it hardly looked natural, for it formed too great a contrast with the deep furrows left uncovered. In short, he was a man of some 50 to 55 years of age, who tried to appear 40. He put his head through the door of the carriage on which a coronet was painted, and sent the groom to ask whether the Count of Monte Cristo was at home. The groom tapped at the porter's window and asked, "Does the Count of Monte Cristo live here?" "His Excellency does live here, but he is engaged," replied the porter. "In any case, here is the card of my master, Baron Danglars. Hand it to the Count of Monte Cristo, and tell him that my master stopped on his way to the chamber in order to have the honor of seeing the Count." "I never speak to his Excellency," replied the porter. "The valet will deliver the message." The groom returned to the carriage, and somewhat crestfallen at the rebuke he had just received, gave his master the porter's answer. "Oh, the man whom they call Excellency is a prince, then, to whom only the valet has the right to speak. Never mind. Since he has a credit on my bank, I shall see him when he wants money." Then, throwing himself back in his carriage, he called out to his coachman in a voice that could be heard at the other side of the street, "To the Chamber of Deputies." The Count had been informed of this visit, and had had time to examine the Baron from behind a window blind. "He's decidedly an ugly brute," he said with a gesture of disgust. "He is decidedly an ugly brute," he said with a gesture of disgust. "At the very sight of the man, anyone can recognize in him the snake by his flat forehead, the vulture by his protruding cranium, and the buzzard by his sharp beak. Ah," he cried, striking once on the copper gong. Ali appeared. "Call Bertuccio," said he. Bertuccio instantly made his appearance. "Your Excellency sent for me," said the steward. "Yes," said the Count. "Did you see the horses that just now drew up before my door?" "Certainly, Excellency, and very beautiful they were, too." "How comes it," said Monte Cristo, frowning, "that when I instructed you to obtain for me the best horses to be had in Paris, there are in the town 2 other horses outside my stables as good as mine?" "The horses you mentioned were not for sale, Count," said Bertuccio. Monte Cristo shrugged his shoulders. "Do you not know, steward, that everything is for sale to him who cares to pay the price? Monsieur Danglars paid 16,000 francs for them, Count. Well, then offer him 32,000. He is a banker, and a banker never loses the opportunity of doubling his capital." "Do you mean that seriously?" asked Bertuccio. Monte Cristo looked at the steward as one astonished that he should dare to ask such a question. "I have a call to make this evening," said he. "I wish to have these horses harnessed to my carriage." Bertuccio retired, bowing. He stopped near the door and said, "At what time does your Excellency propose paying this call?" "At 5 o'clock," replied the Count. "May I point out to your Excellency that it is now 2 o'clock?" the steward ventured to remark. "I know," was Monte Cristo's sole reply. At 5 o'clock the Count sounded his gong 3 times. 1 stroke summoned Ali, 2 Baptistin, and 3 strokes Bertuccio. The steward entered. "My horses," said the Count. "My horses," said the Count. "They've been put in, Excellency," was Bertuccio's reply. The Count went down and saw the much-coveted horses of Danglars harnessed to his own carriage. "They are really beautiful," he said. "You did well to buy them, though you were late in doing so." "Excellency, I had considerable difficulty in getting them," said Bertuccio. They have cost a great deal of money." "Are the horses less beautiful for that?" asked the Count, shrugging his shoulders. "If your Excellency is satisfied, all is well," said Bertuccio. "Where is your Excellency going?" "To Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chaussée." Wow, that is so French. Okay. "To Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin." Arrived at the baron's residence, the count was ushered into the nobleman's presence. "Have I the honor of addressing Monsieur de Monte Cristo?" "And I of addressing Baron Danglars, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor and member of the Chamber of Deputies," said the count. Monte Cristo repeated all the titles he had read on the baron's card. Danglars felt the thrust and bit his lips. "I have received a letter of advice from Messieurs Thompson and French," he said. "I am delighted to hear it, Baron. I am delighted. It will not be necessary to introduce myself, which is always embarrassing. You say you have received a letter of advice." "Yes, but I must confess I do not quite understand its meaning," said Danglars. "This letter, I have it with me, I think." He searched in his pocket. "Yes, here it is. This letter opened credit on my bank to the Count of Monte Cristo for an unlimited sum." "Well, Baron, what is there incomprehensible in that?" "Nothing, monsieur, but the word unlimited." "And it is the word unknown in France?" "Oh, no, monsieur, it is quite all right in regards to syntax, but not quite so from a banker's point of view." "Is the banking firm of Thompson and French not sound, do you think, Baron?" asked Monte Cristo as naively as possible. "That would be a nice thing, to be sure. I have some property deposited with them." "Oh, they are perfectly sound," replied Danglars with an almost mocking smile. "But the meaning of the word unlimited in connection with finances is so vague, and what is vague is doubtful, and in doubt, says the wise man, there is danger." "In other words," replied Monte Cristo, "if Thompson and French are inclined to commit a folly, Danglars' bank is not going to follow suit. No doubt Messieurs Thompson and French do not need to consider figures in their operations, but Monsieur Danglars has a limit to his. As he said just now, he is a wise man." "No one has ever questioned my capital, monsieur," replied the banker proudly. "Then obviously I am the first one to do so." "How so?" "The explanations you demand of me, monsieur, which certainly appear to imply hesitation." "Why, then, monsieur, I will try to make myself clear by asking you to name the amount for which you expect to draw on me," continued Danglars after a moment's silence. "But I have asked for unlimited credit, because I am uncertain of the amount I shall require," replied Monte Cristo, determined not to lose an inch of ground. The banker thought the moment had come for him to take the upper hand. He flung himself back in the armchair, and with a slow, arrogant smile on his lips, said, "Do not fear to ask, monsieur. You will then be convinced that the resources of the firm of Danglars, limited though they may be, are sufficient to meet the highest demands, even though you asked for 1,000,000. What did you say?" "I said 1,000,000, repeated Danglars with the audacity of stupidity. "What should I do with 1,000,000?" said the count. "Good heavens! I should not have opened an account for such a trifling sum. Why, I always carry 1,000,000 in my pocket-book of my suitcase, and he took from his small card-case 2 treasury bills of 500,000 francs each. A man of Danglars' type requires to be overwhelmed, not merely pinpricked, and this blow had its effect. The banker was simply stunned. He stared at Monte Cristo in a stupefied manner, his eyes starting out of his head. "Come now, own that you mistrust Messieurs Thompson and French. I expected this, and though I am not very businesslike, I came forearmed. Here are 2 other letters of credit similar to the one addressed to you. One is from Austin and Excels of Vienna on Baron Rothschild. The other is from Baring Bros of London on Monsieur Lafitte. You have only to say the word, and I will relieve you of all anxiety by presenting my letter of credit to one or the other of these 2 firms." That was enough. Danglars was vanquished. Trembling visibly, he took the letters from London and Germany that the count held out to him, opened them, verified the authenticity of the signatures with a care that would have been insulting to Monte Cristo had they not served to mislead the banker. "Here are 3 signatures, which are worth many millions," said Danglars, rising as though to pay homage to the power of gold personified in the man before him. 3 unlimited credits on our banking firms. Excuse me, Count, though I am no longer mistrustful, I cannot help being astonished. But nothing can astonish a banking establishment like yours, said Monte Cristo, with a great show of politeness. You can send me some money, then, I suppose. Speak, Count. I am at your service. Well, since we understand each other, and you no longer mistrust me, I am not presuming too much in saying this, am I? Let us fix on a general sum for the first year, 6 millions, for example. Very well, let it be 6 millions, replied Danglars hoarsely. If I require more, said Monte Cristo carelessly, we can add to it, but I do not expect to stay in Paris more than a year, and I don't suppose I shall exceed that sum in a year. Anyway, we shall see. To begin with, will you please send me tomorrow 500,000 francs, half in gold and half in notes? I shall be at home until noon, but should I have to go out, I will leave the receipt with my steward. You shall have the money at 10 o'clock in the morning, Count. The Count rose. I must confess to you, Count, said Danglars, I thought I was well informed on all the large fortunes of Europe, and yet I must own that though yours appears to be very considerable, I had no knowledge of it. Is it of recent date? No, monsieur. On the contrary, it is of very long standing, replied Monte Cristo. It is a kind of family treasure which it was forbidden to touch. The interest has gone on accumulating and has trebled the capital. The period fixed by the testator expired only a few years ago, so your ignorance of the matter was quite natural. You will know more about it, though, in a short time. The Count accompanied his words with one of those pale smiles that struck such terror into the heart of Franz d'Épinay. If you would allow me, Count, I should like to introduce you to Baroness Danglars. Excuse my haste, but a client like you almost forms part of the family. Monte Cristo bowed as a sign that he accepted the preferred honor. The financier rang the bell, and the footman in a very bright livery appeared. "Is the Baroness at home?" asked Danglars. "Yes, Monsieur le Baron," replied the footman. "Is she alone?" "No, Monsieur le Baron. Monsieur Debray is with her." Danglars nodded his head. Then, turning to the Count, he said, "Monsieur Debray is an old friend of ours, and a private secretary to the Minister of the Interior. As for my wife, she belongs to an ancient family and lowered herself in marrying me. She was Mademoiselle de Sévères, and when I married her she was a widow after the death of her first husband, Colonel the Marquis de Nargonne. I have not the honor of knowing Madame Danglars, but I have already met Monsieur Lucien Debray." "Really? Where?" "At the house of Monsieur de Morcerf." "Ah, you know the little Viscount, then?" "We were together at Rome during the Carnival." "It is true," said Danglars. "Have I not heard something about a strange adventure with bandits in the ruins? He had a most miraculous escape. I believe he told my daughter and wife something about it when he returned from Italy." "The Baroness awaits your pleasure, messieurs," said the footman, who had been to inquire of his mistress whether she would receive visitors. "I will go on in front to show you the way," said Danglars, bowing, "and I will follow you."